In the world of the ultra-rich family court is just another boardroom, a place where power, influence, and the best lawyers money can buy determine the fate of human lives. He was a tech millionaire, a titan of industry accustomed to winning at any cost. He walked into that courtroom to claim his son, his beautiful mistress by his side, ready to crush the mother of his child. He believed his victory was assured a simple transaction. What he didn't know was that the scales of justice had already been tipped not by his money, but by a secret that connected the judge on the bench to the one person he had wronged the most, his pregnant, discarded wife. Their life was a carefully curated masterpiece of modern success. From the outside, they were the envy of everyone who saw their filtered lives on social media or in the glossy pages of society magazines. He was the architect of this empire, a self-made tech millionaire whose company had revolutionized data security. He was brilliant, driven, and possessed a charisma that could bend boardrooms to his will. His days were a whirlwind of transatlantic flights, high-stakes negotiations, and the relentless pursuit of more. His wife was the silent, graceful partner in his ascent. She had been with him before the billions, when his office was a garage and dinner was instant noodles. An art historian by training, she had set aside her own career to build their home to be the calm center of his chaotic world. She managed their sprawling penthouse overlooking the city, organized the charity galas that polished his public image, and provided the unwavering support that he, in his speeches, always credited as the secret to his success. Their penthouse was less a home and more a museum of their wealth, with stark white walls, minimalist furniture, and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked down on the world he had conquered. It was beautiful, sterile, and lonely. For years she had accepted his frequent absences and emotional distance as the price of his genius. She told herself that his work was demanding, that his mind was always on the next innovation. She would wait up for him, a plate of food kept warm, only for him to return in the dead of night, smelling of expensive whiskey and the stale air of a private jet. He would give her a perfunctory kiss, his mind already on the next day's stock market opening. The first tremor that shook the foundation of her gilded cage was subtle. A credit card bill she happened to open. He had his own private accounts, but this was a household card, showed a recurring charge for a high-end floral delivery service, not to their address, but to one in a trendy, artsy neighborhood across town. When she asked him about it, he'd waved it away as a corporate gift for a client. The answer was smooth, plausible, and utterly dismissive. It left her with a gnawing unease. Then came the whispers from her social circle, the pitying looks from other wives at charity events, the way conversations would suddenly stop when she approached. She was the last to know, as is so often the case. The confirmation arrived not with a bang, but with the quiet, devastating finality of a registered letter. It was from a law firm. Thinking it was a business matter, she opened it. The words blurred, then sharpened into a horrific clarity. It was a formal notice regarding a trust fund established by her husband, for his son. A son she had never known existed. That evening when he came home, she was waiting for him in his cavernous study, the letter lying on his polished mahogany desk. She didn't cry, she didn't scream. The shock was too deep, a cold numbness that had settled in her bones. "I need you to explain this," she said, her voice steady, betraying none of the chaos raging inside her. He didn't even have the grace to look surprised. He sighed the weary sigh of a man inconvenienced. He loosened his tie, poured himself a drink, and sat opposite her. "I was going to tell you," he began, the most cliché of all betrayals. "I was waiting for the right time." "The right time," she echoed, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "The right time to tell me you have a secret family, a child." His story came out in a flat, emotionless torrent, as if he were delivering a quarterly report. The woman, the mistress, was a graphic designer he'd met through a marketing campaign. Their affair had been going on for nearly 5 years. Their son was 4 years old. He spoke of them not with passion or even remorse, but with a chilling practicality. They were a part of his life, another portfolio he managed. "What do you want?" She asked the question hanging in the sterile air between them. A divorce, he said without hesitation. It's the cleanest way. I want to consolidate my life. It's not efficient running two households. Efficient. The word struck her like a physical blow. Their marriage, their history, her years of devotion, all reduced to a matter of efficiency. I'll be more than generous, he continued, leaning forward as if closing a deal. I've already had my lawyers draft a preliminary settlement. It's substantial. You'll never have to worry about money again. You can have the penthouse, the art, whatever you want. We can do this amicably. No press, no drama. She stared at him, at this man she thought she knew. She saw now that the husband she loved had been a phantom for years, replaced by this cold-hearted CEO who managed relationships like assets. He wasn't offering her a future. He was offering her a severance package. And in that moment, as he detailed the financial terms of her dismissal, she felt a flicker of life in her womb, a tiny secret flutter. She had been meaning to tell him for a week, waiting for the perfect romantic moment. She had bought a tiny pair of shoes, planning to surprise him. The irony was so cruel it was almost comical. He was talking about ending their family just as a new life was beginning within her. She didn't tell him. The secret of her pregnancy became her own, a tiny shield against his cold transactional cruelty. To tell him now would be to turn her unborn child into another bargaining chip, another line item in his settlement offer. This child would not be a tool for negotiation. This child would be her salvation. I don't want your money, she said, her voice finding a strength she didn't know she possessed. I don't want this penthouse. I don't want anything that reminds me of you. She stood up, her legs shaking but her resolve firm. She walked out of the study, out of the life he had built for her, leaving the settlement papers and the letter about his other son on the desk. That night she packed a single bag with her personal effects things from her life before him and hailed a cab. As the city lights blurred through the tear-streaked window, she left the gilded cage behind, carrying nothing but her broken heart, her dignity and the precious secret growing inside her. The first few weeks were a blur of shock and survival. The wife moved into a small, nondescript apartment hotel, paying month to month with the last of her personal savings money she had from a small inheritance years ago. The sudden plunge from opulent luxury to anonymous simplicity was jarring. The silence of her small room was a stark contrast to the ever-present hum of the penthouse's climate control and the distant city noise. Here she could hear her own thoughts, and for a while those thoughts were her enemies. She mourned the man she thought she had married. She mourned the future she had envisioned, the family she had dreamed of. And she was terrified. She was pregnant, alone, and on the verge of being penniless. Her husband, true to his word, had her credit cards frozen and access to their joint accounts severed within days of her departure. It was a clear, brutal message: accept his terms or be cut off entirely. He expected her to come crawling back, ready to sign his papers. But with each passing day, grief slowly gave way to a cold, hard anger. It was a clarifying emotion burning away the fog of sorrow. She thought of his word, efficient. He had streamlined her out of his life. He had underestimated her, seeing her as a beautiful accessory, not as a partner who had poured her soul into their shared life. He had forgotten the woman she was before she met him, resilient, intelligent, and fiercely independent. It was that woman she needed to find again. Her first step was to seek community. She found a support group for women navigating difficult divorces held in the basement of a community center. It was a world away from the charity galas she used to attend. Here, women from all walks of life shared stories of betrayal, financial abuse, and their struggles to rebuild. They spoke of lawyers who dismissed them and a legal system that seemed to favor the powerful. Listening to their stories, she realized her own was not unique. Only the numbers on the bank statements were different. The pain, the manipulation, the fight for dignity, that was universal. One evening, a woman in the group spoke about the university legal aid clinic. "They're incredible," she said. "Mostly students, but supervised by some of the best legal minds in the city who do it pro bono. They don't get intimidated by big-shot law firms." The idea took root. Her husband had a battalion of the most expensive lawyers in the country. She couldn't fight them on his terms with his money. She had to find a different kind of weapon, one forged not from wealth but from justice. The next day she made the call. The clinic was housed in a modest building on the edge of the university campus. The waiting room was filled with anxious faces, the air thick with desperation and hope. When she was finally called in, she sat opposite a young, sharp-eyed third-year law student and a staff attorney, a woman in her 40s with a kind but no-nonsense demeanor. She told her story. She laid out the years of her marriage, the discovery of the affair and the child, her husband's cold dismissal, and the freezing of her assets. She spoke with a quiet, compelling dignity. Finally, she took a deep breath. "And," she said, her hand instinctively going to her still flat stomach, "I am pregnant with his child." The staff attorney's eyes widened slightly. She exchanged a look with the law student who was scribbling furious notes. This changed everything. This wasn't just about a divorce settlement. It was about securing the future for an unborn child, a child whose father was actively trying to erase his mother from his life. "Your case is complex," the staff attorney said, her tone shifting from sympathetic to strategic. "Your husband's resources are virtually unlimited. He will try to bury us in paperwork to drag this out until you give up." "I won't give up," the wife replied, her voice firm. The attorney studied her for a long moment. "Given the high-profile nature of your husband and the extreme financial disparity, this case qualifies for oversight by our chief supervisor. She takes a personal interest in cases involving significant spousal misconduct and financial control. She's the best there is." The wife felt a flicker of hope. "Who is she?" "She's a sitting judge in the family court division," the attorney explained. "She believes passionately in access to justice and dedicates 100 hours a year to supervising this clinic. It's her way of staying connected to the ground level of the law. The students and I do the legwork, but she directs the strategy. She's our guiding hand. Her involvement means your case will be handled with the highest level of expertise. No one, and I mean no one, intimidates her." The idea that a judge, a figure of ultimate authority and fairness in the system, would be the architect of her legal strategy was more than she could have hoped for. It felt like a sign. In the weeks that followed, the clinic became her sanctuary and her war room. She worked closely with the student and the staff attorney, meticulously documenting her marriage. They gathered old bank statements, photographs, emails, and witness lists of friends who could testify to her role in her husband's success. It was a painful process dissecting the life she had lost, but with each piece of evidence she felt her power growing. She wasn't just a victim, she was building a case. She had brief, indirect contact with the supervising judge through memos and strategy notes relayed by the staff attorney. The judge's guidance was sharp, insightful, and brilliant. She saw angles the wife never would have considered, focusing on establishing a pattern of coercive control and emotional abuse. Her strategy wasn't just about getting a fair financial settlement. It was about legally validating the wife's contribution and suffering. As her pregnancy progressed, her resolve hardened. This was no longer just for her. It was for the child who deserved to be brought into the world with security and a mother who was whole and strong. The legal battle was her first act of motherhood, protecting her child from the callousness of its father. She was no longer just the wife. She was becoming a warrior, forging a shield not of money or power, but of truth and law, guided by the unseen hand of a woman who sat on the very bench of justice. The millionaire husband moved through the initial stages of his divorce with the same calculated precision he applied to a corporate takeover. In his mind, his wife's departure was an unfortunate but necessary step in his life's restructuring. He had offered her an exit package far exceeding any legal requirement. Her refusal to take it was to him not a sign of dignity, but a foolish emotional miscalculation. He assumed she would quickly run out of resources and come to her senses. He installed his mistress and their young son in a lavishly renovated brownstone, a public declaration of his new life. The mistress, a woman who had spent years in the shadows, reveled in her new role. She was no longer a secret, but the chosen partner of a titan. She filled the house with expensive art, hosted dinner parties for his business associates, and proudly showed off their son, the heir apparent to the tech fortune. But the transition was not as smooth as the husband had anticipated. The mistress, having secured her public position, began to exert her own influence. The years of waiting had cultivated in her a deep-seated insecurity and a hunger for absolute security. She pressured him constantly about marriage, about rewriting his will, about legally formalizing their son's position. Their arguments grew more frequent and intense. He saw her as a beautiful part of his new life, but her constant demands felt like a business negotiation that never ended. She in turn felt that he still treated her like a subordinate, not an equal. The final straw came during a heated argument over a prenuptial agreement he presented to her. It was in her eyes an insult, a document that controlled her even in marriage. "I am the mother of your son," she had screamed at him, her face contorted with rage. "I will not be treated like some employee you can manage with a contract." In the aftermath of the fight, she took their son and checked into an expensive hotel suite, refusing to return his calls. Instead, he received a call from her newly hired lawyer. The message was clear: she was prepared to fight for her son. She would use the boy as leverage to get what she wanted, not just financial security, but a legal status that he couldn't control. The husband was furious. He was being challenged on two fronts. His wife was stubbornly pursuing a divorce through some unknown channel, and now his mistress was attempting to blackmail him using his own son. It was inefficient. It was messy. It had to be dealt with. His solution was characteristically aggressive and decisive. He would not be held hostage. He would seize control of the narrative and the situation. He instructed his legal team, a pack of ruthless litigators from the city's most feared law firm, to initiate legal proceedings. But not for marriage and not for a settlement. He would sue for sole custody of his son. His legal strategy was brutal. They would paint the mistress as an unstable, emotionally volatile gold digger who was unfit to be a primary parent. They would use her lavish spending, her angry text messages, and testimonies from staff to build a case that she was using the child as a pawn in a financial shakedown. His argument would be simple and powerful. He, the stable, incredibly successful father, could provide a better, more secure environment for the boy. His wealth and influence, which he had always seen as tools for success, would now be his weapons. "I want this handled quickly and decisively," he told the senior partner of the law firm in his sterile, glass-walled office. "I want primary physical and legal custody. She can have visitation supervised if necessary. I will not have my son's future dictated by her emotional whims. This is about his well-being." The senior partner, a man with a reputation for scorched earth tactics, nodded slowly. "A custody battle can be unpredictable even with your resources. A judge's discretion is a powerful thing." "Then make sure the judge is impressed," the husband retorted, his voice cold. "Impress upon them the stability I offer versus the chaos she represents. My son deserves the best. I am the best." He was utterly confident. The legal system, like the business world, revered success. He was the embodiment of it. Who would a judge favor, a hysterical, demanding woman, or a calm, powerful man who had built an empire? To him, the answer was obvious. He envisioned the courtroom as just another arena where his power would ensure his victory. His lawyers filed the motion. They meticulously prepared their case, compiling a mountain of evidence designed to shred the mistress's character. They researched the judges in the family court division, preparing profiles on their histories and tendencies. The case was randomly assigned by the court clerk. The file landed on the desk of a judge known for being incredibly sharp, thorough, and immune to outside influence. She was one of the most respected and some said most feared judges on the bench. The husband's lawyer reported this to him. "She's tough," the lawyer said. "By the book. Doesn't like theatrics." "Good," the husband replied. "We have facts, not theatrics. The fact is I can provide a better life for my son. It's a simple cost-benefit analysis. The court will see that." He did not know his wife's whereabouts. He assumed she was struggling, living off her meager savings, and would soon be forced to accept his initial offer. He never once considered that her path and his were set to converge in the most unexpected and catastrophic way imaginable. He was so focused on the battle in front of him, the one against his mistress, that he was completely blind to the war he had already lost. He strode toward the courthouse, a king moving his pieces on a chessboard, utterly unaware that the board itself was about to be flipped over. While the husband was marshaling his forces for the custody battle, his wife was quietly building her own arsenal. Her days were structured around her legal case and her pregnancy. The morning sickness had subsided, replaced by a growing sense of purpose. Her small apartment, once a symbol of her downfall, now felt like a command center. The floor was often covered in legal documents, which she read and organized with the same meticulous care she had once used to curate her husband's art collection. She and her legal team from the clinic were preparing for the first major step in the divorce, filing a motion for temporary support and legal fees. It was a critical juncture. Winning it would level the playing field, giving them the resources to fight his legal army. Losing would be a catastrophic setback. The guidance from their supervising judge was invaluable. Through the staff attorney, she provided razor-sharp critiques of their draft motions. Her notes were always concise and devastatingly effective. Rephrase this. Focus on the pattern of economic isolation, not just the act of freezing the accounts. Strengthen this section with affidavits from the charity board members she worked with. Demonstrate her contribution to his career capital. Anticipate their gold digger defense and preempt it by framing her request as restitution for her non-economic contributions and career sacrifice. The wife never met the judge, but she felt her presence and her intellect guiding every step. She imagined a formidable, brilliant woman and felt a profound sense of gratitude. This unseen mentor was giving her the tools not just to survive, but to fight back. One afternoon, the staff attorney seemed particularly stressed. She was juggling multiple files on her desk. "Sorry for the delay," she said to the wife, gesturing at the stacks of paper. "My other big case is heating up, a real monster of a custody fight." "Is it?" the wife asked, politely curious. "Oh yeah, high conflict, high asset. The kind that brings out the absolute worst in people." The attorney sighed. "Honestly, it makes your husband look like a saint. It's just so much arrogance and entitlement in one room. I'll be glad when the hearing is over next week." The wife felt a pang of sympathy for the unknown person on the other side of that fight. She knew that feeling of being pitted against immense power all too well. She turned her attention back to her own case file, the two women working late into the evening, unaware of the invisible thread connecting their two separate wars. A few days later, the official notice arrived from the court. Their divorce case had been assigned to a judge. The staff attorney read the name on the document and her eyebrows shot up. "Well," she said, a slow smile spreading across her face. "This is a development." "Is it good or bad?" the wife asked anxiously. "It's the best possible news we could have gotten," the attorney replied, her voice filled with a newfound confidence. "This judge is known for taking a holistic view of marital assets. She's a stickler for equitable distribution and has a history of recognizing non-monetary contributions. She despises bullies. Our supervising attorney has argued before her many times. They have a great deal of professional respect for one another. This is a courtroom where the truth matters more than the size of your bank account." A wave of relief washed over the wife. For the first time, she felt that the scales of justice might actually be balanced. Meanwhile, in a sleek, high-rise office across town, the husband and his legal team were finalizing their strategy for the custody hearing. They had binders full of exhibits, screenshots of the mistress's emotional texts, receipts for her extravagant purchases, a psychological evaluation they had commissioned that questioned her stability. They had prepped their witnesses and polished the husband's testimony. He would present as the calm, rational parent concerned only for his son's welfare. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in the main county courthouse, a grand imposing building with marble floors and soaring ceilings. The husband arrived early, dressed in a bespoke suit, the picture of quiet confidence. His mistress was already there, sitting with her lawyer on the opposite side of the cavernous waiting hall. She looked pale and anxious, her bravado gone, replaced by a raw fear that almost made him feel a flicker of pity. Almost. He saw her not as a person but as an obstacle to be overcome. His senior partner leaned in. "We're in courtroom 4B. The judge is the one we discussed. Tough but fair. Just stick to the script. We control the narrative." The husband nodded, his gaze sweeping the hall. And then he saw her. His wife. She was standing near the entrance to the courthouse cafe speaking with a woman he didn't recognize. He froze. What in God's name was she doing here? She looked different. Her face was fuller, and there was a serenity about her that he hadn't seen in years. She was wearing a simple dress, and as she turned slightly he saw it. A small but unmistakable baby bump. The air left his lungs. Pregnant. She was pregnant. Rage, confusion, and a strange, unwelcome pang of something he couldn't name surged through him. He started to move toward her, 100 accusations on his lips, but his lawyer put a firm hand on his arm. "Don't," the lawyer hissed. "Whatever is happening, you will not make a scene here. Not now. We have no idea why she's here, but you engaging with her right before our hearing is a terrible idea." The husband stopped, his fists clenched at his sides. He watched as his wife and the other woman, her staff attorney from the clinic, walked down the hall and disappeared into a different wing of the courthouse, the one marked Judicial Chambers and Legal Aid Services. He assumed she was here for some low-level filing, a procedural step in her misguided legal fight. The sight of her pregnant and defiant infuriated him, but it also reinforced his conviction. She was weak. She was alone. He would deal with her later after he had secured his son. His focus narrowed back to the task at hand. His case was called. He, his lawyers, his mistress, and her lawyer all filed into courtroom 4B. It was a formal, intimidating room dominated by the large, empty judge's bench. They took their places. The air was thick with tension. The king was ready for battle, completely oblivious to the fact that the ghost of the queen he had banished was not only in the castle but was about to bring the whole thing crashing down. The courtroom was silent, save for the rustling of papers. The husband sat ramrod straight at the plaintiff's table, flanked by his senior partner and a junior associate. He exuded an aura of calm authority, a man entirely at home in rooms where important decisions were made. Across the aisle his mistress fidgeted, whispering nervously to her own lawyer. She looked out of her depth, a stark contrast to the husband's composed demeanor. This visual alone was a key part of his legal team's strategy to present a tableau of stability versus instability. "All rise!" The bailiff's voice boomed, echoing off the wood-paneled walls. The heavy door behind the bench opened, and the judge entered. She was a woman in her late 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a presence that commanded immediate respect. She wore her black robes not as a costume but as a uniform, one that seemed to amplify her natural authority. She settled into her chair, her gaze sweeping across the courtroom, taking in every detail. The husband's lawyer gave him a subtle, confident nod. This was the moment. "This court is now in session, the Honorable Judge presiding," the bailiff announced. "We are here today to hear the petition in the matter of custody concerning—" The judge held up a hand, stopping the bailiff mid-sentence. Her eyes were fixed on the case file in front of her. She read the names of the plaintiff and the defendant. Then she looked up, her gaze moving from the husband to his lawyer to the mistress, and then scanning the rest of the room. It was a standard procedure, but there was an intensity to her scrutiny that made the air crackle. It was in that moment that the door at the back of the courtroom opened quietly. The wife's staff attorney from the legal aid clinic slipped in, taking a seat in the back row of the public gallery. She was there simply to observe a colleague's case, a common practice among lawyers. The judge's gaze passed over her, and for a split second a flicker of recognition registered in her eyes before she returned her attention to the case file. She opened it, reviewed the first page, and then looked directly at the husband's senior partner. "Counsel," the judge said, her voice crisp and devoid of any emotion. "Please approach the bench. Opposing counsel as well." This was unusual. A bench conference before opening statements was not unheard of, but it was rare. The husband watched as his lawyer and the mistress's lawyer approached the towering bench. He felt a prickle of unease. The judge leaned forward and spoke to the two lawyers in a low, confidential tone that didn't carry to the rest of the room. From his seat, the husband could only see the backs of the lawyers' heads. He saw his senior partner nod, then freeze. The man's entire posture changed. His shoulders, once so confident, slumped almost imperceptibly. He turned his head slightly and the husband saw his face. It was pale, his expression a mixture of disbelief and horror. The mistress's lawyer looked equally stunned. The judge spoke for another moment, her face an unreadable mask of judicial impartiality. Then she dismissed them. As his lawyer walked back to the table, he looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. His composure was shattered. "What is it? What happened?" the husband demanded in a harsh whisper. The senior partner sat down heavily. He looked at his client, his eyes wide with the gravity of the situation. "We have a problem," he breathed. "A catastrophic problem." "What are you talking about? The judge?" The lawyer said, his voice barely audible. "She is the supervising attorney for the University Legal Aid Clinic." The husband stared at him, the words not making sense. "So what does that have to do with anything?" The lawyer swallowed hard. "She had to disclose a potential conflict of interest. Before she can proceed, she has a duty to inform all parties of any connection she has to related cases. She informed us that the clinic she supervises has just taken on a new pro bono case, a complex high-asset divorce." A cold dread began to seep into the husband's bones. He thought of his wife downstairs in the legal aid wing of the building. He thought of her pregnant belly. "Her client," the lawyer continued, his voice cracking slightly, "is your wife." The world tilted on its axis. The entire courtroom seemed to recede, the sounds muffled as if he were underwater. The judge. The woman who held the fate of his son in her hands. The ultimate arbiter of truth he was trying so hard to impress. For weeks she had been the unseen architect of his wife's legal strategy. She knew everything. She had been reading his wife's account of their marriage, his callous dismissal, his financial coercion. She knew about his affair, the secret son, all of it, not as evidence in a future case, but as the foundational truth upon which she was building a case against him. And she knew about the baby. He looked from his ashen-faced lawyer up to the bench. The judge was now looking directly at him. There was no malice in her eyes, no anger. There was something far worse, pure, unadulterated knowledge. She saw him not as the powerful titan of industry, but as the man who had discarded his pregnant wife. His entire identity in this room, so carefully constructed, had been obliterated in an instant. The judge spoke, her voice now ringing with clarity through the stunned silence of the courtroom. "It has come to the court's attention," she announced formally, "that I have a professional involvement in a separate pending matrimonial action involving one of the parties in this matter. Specifically, I serve as the supervising pro bono attorney for the legal counsel representing the plaintiff's spouse. Given this clear and insurmountable conflict of interest, I must recuse myself from this case immediately." She stood up. "This matter will be returned to the clerk's office for reassignment to another judge. This hearing is adjourned." With a swift turn, she walked out of the courtroom, the heavy door closing behind her with a soft, definitive click. It was over. Not just the hearing, but everything. His strategy, his credibility, his carefully crafted narrative all lay in ruins. The mistress was staring at him, her expression a mix of confusion and dawning realization. Her lawyer was already whispering furiously to her. His own team was in disarray. The senior partner was staring blankly at his useless binders of evidence. The news of why the most respected judge on the bench had recused herself would spread through the courthouse like wildfire. Any judge who now received this case would know the story. They would know that he was not just a father seeking custody, but a man fighting a war on two fronts, a man whose character had been laid bare before the judiciary itself. He stood up, his legs unsteady, and walked out of the courtroom. He saw his wife standing at the far end of the hall speaking with her attorney. She must have heard the commotion. Their eyes met across the long marble corridor. There was no fear in her gaze, no pain, only a quiet, unshakable strength he had never seen before. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod, not of triumph, but of finality. In that moment, he understood. He had walked into court that morning believing he was the king ready to sacrifice a pawn. He now realized he had been in checkmate from the very first move. The fallout from the aborted hearing was swift and brutal. The husband's world, once governed by his absolute control, began to unravel with breathtaking speed. The story of the judge's recusal became the talk of the city's legal community. It was a delicious piece of gossip, but more than that, it was a fundamental shift in his power dynamic. He was no longer seen as an untouchable titan, but as a man who had been outmaneuvered by the very system he sought to dominate. The custody case was reassigned to a new judge, but the damage was done. The new judge, fully aware of the backstory, viewed every motion and argument from the husband's team with a deeply skeptical eye. The narrative of the unstable mistress was now tainted by the knowledge of the discarded pregnant wife. The mistress's lawyer, emboldened by this turn of events, fought back with renewed vigor, painting the husband as a manipulative monster juggling multiple families. The custody battle devolved into a protracted, ugly, and ruinously expensive war of attrition that he was no longer guaranteed to win. His carefully managed public image began to crack. Whispers turned into articles on gossip websites, and then into speculative pieces in the business pages. Tech mogul's messy private life spills into court. One headline read, "His board of directors grew nervous. His brand was built on innovation, stability, and control, all of which were now being publicly questioned." Faced with a losing battle on two fronts, the husband did the one thing he had never done before he capitulated. It was a business decision, a cold calculation to cut his losses. He instructed his lawyers to offer his wife a settlement. It was no longer the generous severance package he had first proposed, but a deal born of desperation. His wife, guided by her legal team, negotiated from a position of absolute strength. She didn't ask for the penthouse or the art collection. She asked for something far more valuable: a future. They structured a settlement that established a significant untouchable trust for her and their coming child. It gave her complete financial independence, severing all ties to him and his volatile empire. It was her restitution, her back pay for years of unpaid labor as the architect of his social and home life. He signed the papers without a fight. It was the cost of making one of his problems go away. Months later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, the wife gave birth to a healthy baby girl. In the quiet of the hospital room, holding her daughter, she felt a sense of peace that had eluded her for years. The child was not a product of a broken home, but the catalyst for her mother's rebirth. She never returned to the world of glass towers and society galas. She used the settlement to build a new foundation, one based on her own values. She bought a charming, modest house in a quiet neighborhood with good schools. She went back to school herself, finishing the master's degree in art history that she had abandoned for her husband. Her life was no longer defined by her husband's success or his failures. It was defined by walks in the park with her daughter, by late nights studying in her cozy living room, by the laughter of friends in her garden. She was happier in her small house than she ever had been in the cavernous penthouse. She had lost a fortune but had gained herself. As for the husband, he remained unimaginably wealthy, but his life was a hollowed-out version of what it once was. He eventually settled the custody battle, agreeing to a joint arrangement that left him feeling controlled and resentful. His relationship with the mistress was forever fractured by the court case, devolving into a tense co-parenting arrangement built on mistrust. He had his empire, his jets, and his billions, but he was profoundly alone, a king ruling over an empty kingdom. One sunny afternoon, the wife was sitting on a park bench watching her toddler take her first wobbly steps on the grass. She looked up, and for a moment she thought she saw her ex-husband's car drive past the tinted windows, hiding whoever was inside. She felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, not even pity. He was just a ghost from a former life, a man who had taught her the most valuable lesson of all, that true wealth isn't about what you can buy, but about what you can't lose. And looking at her daughter laughing as she plopped down on the soft grass, she knew she was the richest woman in the world. 4 years later, the city was celebrating the opening of a landmark exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The event was the culmination of years of work, a breathtaking collection of Renaissance sculptures. In the grand hall, amidst the gentle murmur of the city's elite, the woman who was once only known as the millionaire's wife moved with a quiet, earned confidence. She was no longer a guest at these functions. She was a part of their creation. With her master's degree complete, she had secured a coveted position as an assistant curator at the museum. Tonight she was working her name tag, identifying her role, her passion for the art, evident as she spoke to donors about the historical significance of a Donatello bronze. Her life was her own. Her daughter was a bright, happy 4-year-old who loved painting and stories about knights and dragons. Their small house was filled with light laughter and the comforting clutter of a life well lived. She had found not just peace but purpose. Her ex-husband was also there. He hadn't intended to come, but his PR team had insisted. His company was a primary sponsor of the exhibition, a strategic move to launder his tarnished reputation through the pristine halls of high culture. He stood near a marble archway, a glass of champagne in hand, a stunningly young actress draped on his arm. He was playing the part of the magnanimous patron of the arts, but his eyes were restless. Success felt different now. The thrill of the deal had faded, leaving behind a persistent, low-grade emptiness. His relationship with his son was a series of scheduled appointments and strained conversations mediated by the boy's ever-resentful mother. He had won the battles, but the kingdom was barren. And then he saw her. He almost didn't recognize her. She was turned away from him, gesturing elegantly at a sculpture. She wore a simple dark blue dress that was professional and chic. Her hair was pulled back, emphasizing the intelligent lines of her face. There was an energy about her, a focused, vibrant passion that he dimly recalled from the woman he had first met, long before the billions had buried her personality under a veneer of quiet compliance. He watched frozen as a wealthy couple listened to her enraptured. She was not an accessory tonight. She was the expert. He excused himself from his companion and moved toward her, driven by an impulse he didn't understand. He waited until the couple moved on, leaving her alone for a moment as she made a note on a small clipboard. "You look well," he said. His voice sounded hollow in the cavernous space. She turned and her eyes met his. There was no shock, no anger, no flicker of pain. There was only a brief, polite recognition, the kind one gives to a distant acquaintance. "Hello," she said, her tone level. "I'm surprised to see you here. I didn't think Renaissance sculpture was your kind of acquisition." The gentle barb hit its mark. "My company is a sponsor," he explained, feeling strangely defensive. "It's good for the brand." "Of course," she said, a small, unreadable smile on her lips. "The brand." An awkward silence fell between them, filled only by the ambient chatter of the party. He felt a desperate need to fill it, to explain, to recast their shared history into something less damning for him. "I see you've landed on your feet," he said, gesturing vaguely at her name tag at the museum around them. "I have to admit I'm impressed. It seems everything worked out." She looked at him, her gaze clear and direct. "Things didn't work out," she corrected him softly, but with a spine of steel. "I worked for them. There's a difference." He had no response to that. He fumbled for a new topic. "And your daughter, is she well?" At the mention of her child, the wife's entire demeanor softened. The professional mask slipped away, replaced by a radiant maternal warmth that made her glow. "She's wonderful. She's starting preschool. She has your stubborn chin, but my love for color. She's the best thing in my life." The simple, unadorned joy in her voice was like a physical blow. He thought of his own son, a boy he saw every other weekend who looked at him with a guarded confusion, already skilled in navigating the Cold War between his parents. "That's good to hear." He said the words, feeling inadequate. "My son, he's in therapy. His mother and it's complicated." He hadn't meant to say it to reveal that crack in his perfect facade, but her genuine happiness had unsettled him, making his own loneliness feel acute. She offered no sympathy, only a quiet nod of understanding. She had no more emotional energy to spend on his problems. "Well," she said, glancing at her watch, "I have to get back to it. The director wants a report on the evening before we close. It was interesting seeing you." She turned to leave her duty, calling her away from him, back to a life he had no part in. "Wait," he said, his voice more urgent than he intended. She paused, looking back at him with an expression of mild impatience. He didn't know what he wanted to say. "I'm sorry I was wrong. I miss you." The words felt false, transactional, like another negotiation. He had destroyed their past, and she had built a future that had no room for him. All he could see was the chasm between the man he was and the happiness she had found without him. "Nothing," he finally said, defeated. "Enjoy your evening." She gave him one last final nod and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of art lovers. He was left standing alone, the champagne in his hand, tasting bitter. He looked around the gallery at the timeless, beautiful sculptures that had survived centuries. They were masterpieces born of vision and painstaking work, and he realized with a clarity that was both sudden and devastating that he had once possessed his own masterpiece, a life of love, family, and shared history, and in his arrogant pursuit of more, he had carelessly smashed it to pieces. All the money in the world couldn't put it back together. This story is a powerful reminder that true strength isn't measured in bank accounts or corporate power, but in resilience, dignity, and the courage to rebuild. The millionaire husband had everything money could buy, but he lost the things that truly matter. His wife left with nothing discovered, a wealth within herself that he could never touch. She proves that justice doesn't always live in the law books. Sometimes it's found in the quiet, unyielding strength of the human spirit. What did you think of her incredible journey? Do you believe he got what he deserved? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please give this video a like. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that will leave you thinking long after they're over. Thank you for listening.